The University of Johannesburg, the future reimagined.
So these brown bag lunches have become a real highlight of the FPP program. And Dr. Menon has really been insistent on getting the brightest and the best, really distinguished leaders and scholars and public intellectuals for the program. So we've already set the bar very high. And I'm really delighted today to welcome Dr. Nelwamondo, who is the CEO of the NRF. We thought that just to save time and proceed with the program, that we won't read out his very impressive CV, that we'll post it rather on the chat, so you have some idea of what the profile of a really highly accomplished scholar and leader like Dr. Nelwamondo looks like. So it perhaps will give you some benchmark or threshold to aspire towards as well. So Dr. Nelwamondo, I'm very, very pleased to welcome you. It's a real privilege to have you, and thank you for making time to grace this program with your presence. It's indeed a great privilege to have you. I should say that with the participants in the Future Professors program, you're also in good company because the cohort that's assembled here today emerged from a really rigorous and selective process. So each of the universities identified the high flyers and the best of their candidates. And then from that, they selected and shortlisted and then made recommendations to the program. And there was well over 100 from that shortlist that were eventually whittled down. So it was the cream of the cream, really, that were brought together into this program. And these are really identifying the brightest and the most promising of our young up-and-coming scholars and researchers, who we have no doubt will rise to great heights. And the program really is designed to assist their development as leaders, as scholars, equipping them to be agents of change. So they already come, I must say, not with a blank slate, but many have highly distinguished records of achievement already. And tremendous capability. So we're not dealing with novices. So it's really about honing their skills and their capabilities and their insights, and getting the benefit of the wisdom of the more experienced and those who walked that pathway before, and those who have command, like yourself, of the whole scholarly and research enterprise. And to help them navigate this space and how to leverage the advantages and the possibilities so that they have the best possible futures. Now, I say all of this because recognizing that this group is full of high flyers, as I've indicated, and that their knowledge is also quite advanced in many ways, but it's a diverse group. Some are just starting out and have shown huge promise. Others have made really good advances along the pathway. So it'll be difficult in that way to pitch a presentation to them that kind of caters for everybody. So my appeal, therefore, is that we aspire to, and this is also the view of the steering team that I'm representing, that we aim for a more dialogic approach so that while of course we will hear from you, but we aim to use the greater part of the time to hear the concerns and issues from the participants so that they take full advantage of your having the chief executive here who can, so as it were, they can get it from the horse's mouth. Now, my final point is, Professor Nelwamondo, is that you've indicated, and we know that following you as well, that you're also very passionate about the fourth industrial revolution. I am as well. Many assembled here are. And associated with that passion, of course, is the potential impact of the research and the technologies associated with the fourth industrial revolution in the advancement of humankind. And that's already implicit in that is a vision for not just a parochial approach to scholarship and research, but we're doing something bigger and something with a greater vision behind it. And that really appealed to me when I read that. And that actually has a convergence with the aspirations of the program as well, because integral to the program is a concern that the participants reflect regularly and throughout the program and into the future as well about how their work impacts upon society, how it leads to change, how does it deal with the contemporary challenges that we confront. So I hope that gives you some kind of feel for what our aspirations and intentions are, and that you can engage with us in that way. So I'm delighted now to hand over to you to speak to us, and then we will carry on the conversation after you pause. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Program Director. It is indeed a pleasure and honor for me to be here in this brown bag session. Initially, when I had brown bag, I thought it would be around lunchtime, and I realized you really have a very late lunch. Be that as it may, maybe before we get into the gist of the conversation, let me just introduce members of my team that have joined me. And they've actually joined me for the very reason that you've mentioned, that we also want to listen to you and hear what are some of the challenges and how do we then navigate through these challenges together. That becomes a critical element for us in the journey that we are embarking on now, to listen to each other, to know what views are on the ground, and so on. So it's not a one-way stream. I think it's a stream that requires conversation from the bright minds, including those who are sitting on this table and those who are sitting somewhere else, and maybe the views that we as the NRF might have, and we then synthesize those to then shape the direction for our future. So with that, and I can see that some of the recent NRF award winners are here on the, I could see a few names that I could recognize. And in that session, I did promise that I would like to actually have an engagement with some of the young scholars, you know, probably at a nice setting where we can sort of sit somewhere and have a conversation about what are the key challenges that as a young researcher, as a young scientist, one is facing, and how can the NRF assist in that regard? Who can we bring on board to assist? And that will then help us in shaping the direction to which we shall go. So with me here, I have firstly Dr. Makobetsa Kati, who is the Executive Director responsible for the research chairs and centers of excellence. I must say that he's on leave today, but he was kind enough to join us for this session, which also talks to how serious we took this conversation, so that we have all the ears that are necessary to listen to us, to listen to you, to be around the table. We also have Dr. Romila Maharaj, who is the Executive Director responsible for human and infrastructure capacity development, a topic that is very relevant for what the audience in this table would like to hear. And she's here with us as well, and she will actually give the bulk of the presentation. I'm just going to touch on a few elements and hand over to her, and we will then stay for questions. Mr. Program Director, the way I see this is, let's have it as an open conversation, because I think we don't want to just present. We want to hear what the colleagues have, how we can support them, and how we can actually advance the science system together. With this being said, I want to just borrow on what you just mentioned now, the issue of impact on society. That's a very critical aspect, because we have found ourselves, and I think maybe COVID is an eye-opener for a number of us, in that we realize that as much as, you know, one can be excited about all areas of science, and we should be, but when things become tough, you then have limited resources. You then have government cutting funding in various forms because they need to prioritize other things. You know, the social grants that they're giving to people who so need them because they've lost jobs and so on. But what then happens in that process is that you then find research suffering simply because we have a cut in funding. A case in point here is that at the onset of COVID, and in particular last year, as the NRF, we got a cut of 763 million rands, which then calls for a perhaps new way of rethinking how we fund research and what research is funded. And the key element is exactly the word that you have mentioned, impact, where one starts saying, which research will make impact? Can we see a proper path to impact so that we can actually prioritize that? Because it's only when we do that, that even our principals in government can then say, as opposed to building a new hospital in areas where there's no hospital, maybe let's invest this money in research because the return on investment will be greater in this form. So it's a question of how do we then prioritize, given that we have limited resources? And that's a very big challenge that we're facing. And it's not only us. When we speak with all other funding agencies across the world, you hear similar challenges of prioritization. So the critical component there, which shapes this conversation, is about, as much as you've asked us to come and talk to you about leveraging opportunities within the South African system to enhance research, I will even take it further to say to enhance research that makes impact, because it's not every research that can take us to a better place in a short space of time. Some might actually take much longer and so on. But at the moment, we don't have all the resources for all research that's available. So how do we prioritize? How do we make sure that people then play within the space that we believe is meaningful? You also mentioned, Mr. Program Director, the idea of fourth industrial revolution. And if you look at what happened over the last 2 years when we had COVID within amongst us, maybe people moved away from fourth industrial revolution talk simply because the focus was largely on the fourth, on COVID and its remedies. But things are winding down, and the conversation comes, or is starting to reignite about what should we do not to be left behind. What should we do to ensure that we as South Africa, we as Africa, and maybe the rest of the developing world are not left behind in the era of the fourth industrial revolution? That also becomes a critical conversation. One thing that we also picked maybe during the onset of COVID is a fusion of areas where, as opposed to sort of people working in demarcated fields, it required us to work across fields. So the boundary lines between fields started merging very easily or becoming invisible in a manner that I think was necessary, and I think we managed to rise to the occasion. And something from that has to be learned is that maybe we need to sort of keep that momentum. So I will ask Dr. Romila Maharaj to share the slides on her side, because I only have 4 slides or 5 slides that I'll talk to, and she'll talk to the rest. So as I've said, the key idea or the main gist of this presentation is about leveraging opportunities within the South African system to enhance research. But it's not just an issue of opportunities. I think for the opportunity, we need to actually map this opportunity with the return in terms of what is it that South Africa will gain from these opportunities? What will the science system gain from these opportunities? So I thought, let me just start by touching on the NRF mandate, assuming and knowing that a number of the colleagues around the table know what the NRF does, but I thought, let me just take this extract of the mandate, which talks to us being called to do mainly 4 things. The first one is about supporting, promoting, and advancing research and HCD through funding, but for a specific purpose, in order to facilitate the creation of knowledge, innovation, and development in all fields of science and technology. This is very important for people to know that, again, from the mandate, it becomes very clear that there's a need to, as much as the areas are broad, is all fields of science and technology, including humanities and social sciences and indigenous knowledge. But if you want to create knowledge, if you want to create innovation, if you want to create development, there could be areas that could be quicker. And it's a question of then ensuring that people are playing within the correct fields in any given time. I will agree if an argument is brought that all fields of science are important, and indeed they are, but I don't think we have that luxury of sort of playing across. I think there's a need maybe to prioritize. One can say for the next 10 years, let's prioritize these kind of areas, and then the other 10 years go somewhere else, and so forth. And we have seen a number of cases worldwide, countries like Korea, countries like Singapore, they've done something similar, where they had to choose areas of their strength, and they focus largely on those areas. So I think this is something that we need to actually have a longer conversation on. Number 2, we are called to develop, support, and maintain national research facilities. I'm sure the colleagues around the table are aware of the national facilities that are managed by the NRF, the likes of the Itemba Labs, the likes of the radio astronomy facilities, the likes of the optical astronomy facilities, and the likes of the environmental facilities that we have, and so on. So the key part is that we are supposed to support, develop, and maintain these national facilities. Firstly, for researchers who want to actually have access to these big research facilities, but also in certain areas. This is the area where we have capacity, where we do research ourselves, but also opening these facilities for international collaborations, amongst others. The third one is supporting and promoting public awareness and engagement with science. And if I take it back to the COVID days, this talks to us taking science to the people. There were a lot of these issues, even now, the anti-vaxxers and so on, maybe because they're lacking science, they're lacking the understanding. So how do we ensure that the public is aware? But it's not just awareness, they can engage with science. That's a critical aspect of part of our mandate. Then the last one basically says we should do everything that government wants us to do, in short, because it says promoting the development and the maintenance of the national science system and support of government priorities. And these are very clear. If you look at government priorities, you look at Vision 2030 of the government, it talks about the priorities. So the question then becomes, how do we support these priorities? How do we ensure that the research that is being done, the research that we are influencing to be done, the research that we are supporting is going to make impact, one, but more than anything else will be in support of those government priorities. Next slide. So the key issue here talks to how do we position the NRF within the national science landscape. Our mandate is very broad, with limited resources. We are required to do multiple things, and we have put this in maybe 4 pillars. The first one, you can sort of summarize it around advancing knowledge. which talks to aspects that I've mentioned of supporting the research, the provisioning of research infrastructure platforms and equipment, among others. The other one talks to transforming lives. What lives? This is where the aspects of postgraduate support comes in. This is where aspects of emerging and early career research support comes in. This is where how we select instruments to deal with aspects of transformation generally, gender or race and so on comes in as well, where we're saying what we are supporting should actually aid in transforming lives in this country. Third element, inspiring a nation, of course, through science engagement and all aspects that I've mentioned, education, science awareness, science communication, come into this stage to play, where we're saying, how do we make sure that we have an engaged society that understands science? And of course, strengthening the NSI, which talks to building the partnerships and the synergies, providing system-wide information and intelligence, because we're sort of sitting in a space where we have a reach to all the universities and science councils and a number of other funders and so on. So it makes more sense for us, again, in the fourth industrial revolution era, for us to then be this hub that connects information, where you can actually find information about, who are the experts in this domain and so on. And we should be able to see that kind of information by a click of a button and on short notice. So this is something that, again, we are working on, but our mandate calls for us to do quite a number of these things. Next slide talks to our vision, mission, and the critical success factors. And our vision at the moment is focused on research for a better society. Again, I'm emphasizing aspect of impact, where we are saying knowledge and research have to be at the epicenter of the national development. When we talk of knowledge, aspects of excellence sit central to that aspect, where we're saying it's not going to be knowledge unless it's excellent. So aspects of, again, pushing for excellence come in. A knowledge and research enterprise whose products and effect bring about impact across several dimensions. How do we move away from just boasting that my paper has been cited 100 times to saying my paper has led to a product that is being used in a hospital? That's the kind of thinking that we're saying. We need to then actually ensure that research can produce a better society. And we'll do this by enabling and facilitating the contribution of knowledge and scientific research to the national development. The critical success factors here are the 4 elements that anchor our strategy of the NRF, our vision, and it talks to transformation. And we're talking about transformation very broadly, in that it's not just along the demographic lines, but it's along all other areas. Inclusivity comes in, it's about even geographic transformation. You don't want only the institutions in Gauteng to be the ones that are doing excellent work. How do you ensure that you have a transformed science system across all areas? Impact, I'm not going to say anything more. I think I've been emphasizing the aspect of impact. I spoke about excellence, that if you're not excellent, you might as well forget about transformation. If you're not excellent, you might as well forget about impact, because you're not going to get those two unless you are demonstrating excellence. And the critical aspect is that we want this thing to be sustainable. And there are a lot of issues that come in this aspect of sustainability. These are issues that talk to, are we adequately funded, and so on. And Dr. Maharaj can talk to you at length about what we have been doing about, ensuring that we are sufficiently funded. But at the moment, again, we're not sufficiently adequately funded. And I think the key aspect here that I just want to highlight is the following. As much as we support all the areas of science, it's very important for you to note that South Africa spends, so the gross expenditure on R&D in South Africa is about 40 to 45 billion per annum. If you look at the budget that comes to the NRF, it's only 10% of that. It's about 4 billion rands. And this 10% is not only to fund research, but you have half of it that's sort of demarcated for research infrastructure, where we are running large-scale projects, the SKAs and the others. So basically, you can even say what we have for funding research is sort of like 5%. And that should tell you that clearly we're not adequately funded. We are leading conversations with Parliament, with Treasury, with our line department, with the ministry to change that landscape. And we are hoping that these things will change, because this will then lead to a transformation that is meaningful. At the moment, we don't have resources to make or to realize this transformation. So just, and this is my last slide, I just want to end by sharing the NRF transformation framework, which talks about transforming equity profiles of postgraduate students, researchers, transforming the knowledge enterprise, transforming science and society relationships, and building diverse and inclusive learning organization. And of course, this requires an evidence-based set of choices and implications that the NRF has to make. At the moment, there are a few things that we have put in place. We have the DSI NRF postgraduate funding policy, which is now implemented or being implemented, which changes how we're funding research. I'm not going to go into the details now. Aspects of developing a new policy for resourcing of the NRF mandate. This I mentioned now in terms of, I don't think our mandate is fully adequately funded, and it needs much more. But again, it's a question of what is science doing, such that decision makers in government or treasury should sit and say, as opposed to giving money to social development, can we give this money to science? Because the science system will actually produce better results in a shorter space of time. So there's a lot of things that I think we just need to change in our mindset. The definition of the research agenda, defining broader impact of the NRF funded research, and this is the element where we are saying, let's again look into the research that we have funded, and let's understand what is the impact, and can we actually make sure that what we fund going forward has a clear line to impact. So these are some of the things that we're going to change, and it's going to change how some of our instruments are going to work and how we evaluate them. Again, excellence, as I've said, is a critical aspect of this success, if we were to make it a success indeed. So with this, Program Director, I will ask Dr. Maharaj to then continue with the next set of slides, starting with just giving a snapshot of the NRF investments in the knowledge areas. But Dr. Maharaj, let me hand over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, colleagues. As Dr. Nelwamondo has said, I'm going to follow on from where he left off, and we also have my colleague, Dr. Kati here, who manages the research chairs and centers of excellence programs, so he can also add and will also be here to respond to any of your questions. Very broadly, these are how our current funding maps out against the various investment areas. I'm not going to delve into them in detail. We will share this presentation with you for you to peruse at your leisure. The way we arrived at these areas is partially the responses to the applications that we receive from the research community, and in some areas where we specify areas of funding. The landscape is changing, and you did see in one of the earlier slides mention of defining the research agenda. That has not been finalized because we will align with the decadal plan and other strategies, but especially once the decadal plan has been finalized, we will need to make choices as to how we direct, perhaps not all, but the bulk of our funding. I included, excuse me, this slide, again, just to give you a sense of how our funding has been spread in the last financial year or last academic year. And you can see that the bulk of it has gone to institutional grants. That includes the SACHIs and the COEs. The next chunk goes to research grants and then fellowships and scholarships. That's the postgraduate students. There's a small amount that has gone to equipment grants, a smaller amount that is largely the National Equipment Program, Strategic Research Infrastructure Programs. And then you see incentive funding, travel grants, and targeted grants. Now, what do these three colors mean? The green says awarded, the red is released, and the blue is claimed. So in some programs, we do have a principle of over-allocation. And the reason for that over-allocation, especially with the scholarships and fellowships, is not all of the grants that we make are taken up. But at the end of the day, we do need to try to ensure as best we can that we spend the available budget. So you see a discrepancy there between what we awarded, what was released. In other words, those are grants where the grant holders have accepted the condition of the grant, and the blue is what they have spent. Now, a perennial challenge that we have in the system is that, as you know, with the financial status in the country, Treasury is borrowing money, and we are failing to spend our budget within a financial year. So that weakens our arms, not just as NRF DSI, but as a system to be able to motivate for additional funding. And so we are working towards reducing that amount of unspent funds so that we can get to a point where the amount of committed unspent funds we carry over from year to year is at a minimum. So you have seen in our mandate the various aspects that we are mandated to do through an act of parliament. And the first one of that is refers to coordination. And so we work very closely across the departments, but especially across our line department DSI and our other department DHET. And as you know, we now fall under one ministry. We're also looking at increased coordination amongst universities. We know the playing fields are not leveled given the history of our country. Bringing together science, technology, and innovation intensive departments, clusters, and enabling departments such as National Treasury, DPME, and COPTA. Increased coordination between government, business, academia, civil society, and monitoring the performance of the NSI and specific STI strategies. Now, this is not, all of this is not done independently by the NRF, but it's coordination against the system, within the system where NRF has a role to play. There are also a number of actionable policies and strategies, and depending on the field of your interest, you will yourself be familiar with a range of strategies. Again, there's a role for us to play in creating an enabling environment for innovation through an innovation compact to drive coordination, to participate in high-level agenda setting for STI across government. I have made mention of the decadal plan, and once the DSI has finalized that decadal plan, they will be looking to all the players in the STI to give effect to that decadal plan. The NRF has developed an impact framework, and this is something that in South Africa we are behind many other countries in being able to evaluate the socio-economic impact of the research and the work that we do, not just as NRF, but as a country. You've also heard Our CEO mentioned the DSI NRF postgraduate funding policy, which was implemented last year with the first cohort of students being funded under this policy in the current academic year. Creating knowledge partnerships is critical if we want to be a global players. So, of course, enhancing international networks, mentorship across, and access to global research funds and infrastructure for students. Early career researchers is also critical. Accelerating career paths of exceptional early career researchers needs to be strengthened in our system, and to this end, the NRF has been developing a program for leading researchers and scholars, and it's a program that we envisage individuals such as yourself progressing to fast track your career paths to become leading researchers and scholars. Industry academia partnerships are also an important aspect for being able to advance knowledge and knowledge creation in the country. We are increasingly focusing on strategic interventions with industry, and to this end we have developed an NRF industry partnership strategy, and we have appointed a director, and we will be fostering new relationships. It's also, not only does it enable collaborative research and perhaps research of greater socioeconomic impact, but also it's an opportunity for leveraging of funding and for exchange of human capital between industry and academia. We've also developed a global knowledge partnership program, and the primary objective of this is to be able to create opportunities for increasing numbers of postgraduate students and early career researchers to be able to have an opportunity to have international research experience. It is our hope that every PhD student that we fund would have an opportunity to at least have a short stint abroad during the 3-year doctoral program. So we create opportunities for supporting, advancing, facilitating research through competitive research programs. I think you may be familiar with many of these. We have broadly categorized them into emerging next generation or postgraduate students, early or emerging researchers, established researchers, strategic investments, research infrastructures, and then
we're struggling to hear you. I wonder if others are as well. I am.
Yes. To national and global research. NRF rating, that I know some interest in this rating, has been around for many decades. It's gone through. So a flash. Say, you hear me now? Hello?
Yeah, it's better now.
Yeah.
Thanks.
It's better now. Okay, I just saw a flash saying an unstable network. Okay. So the rating system was introduced many decades ago, and it was introduced at a time where it was a lever to redistribute funding across the system. And at the time of introduction, you needed to be rated to get NRF funding. It has evolved over the years. And with that evolution is also an opportunity to reflect on the role that it's serving in the system, given a greater emphasis on socioeconomic impact, should we have other evaluation mechanisms in the country as well, similar to those in other countries?
Sorry, Ramila, how many more slides do you have?
I think there's about 25 in total.
Oh, good God. Then we won't have any time left for the engagement with the participants. So may I request that you skim through in the next few minutes, so we at least have about 15 minutes to engage. There are quite a few questions that have come up on the chat line.
Okay, all right, sure. Okay, I will skip through them then. So these are, as I've mentioned, the broad research areas. We fund across the chain, right from undergraduate students to strategic investments. Perhaps I should speak, I won't speak in detail to the South African research chairs. Perhaps Dr. Kati can speak in more detail when we get to that. But this is one of the strategic investments that we have in the country. We also have the centers of excellence that are also strategic investments in the country. And we have a number of NRF-led industry partnerships for research. The most recent one being with the SASOL partnership. There are other partnerships that we have, the Science Granting Council initiative. I think that could also be an opportunity for networking for the Future for Professors program. The Global Research Council is also something that they may be interested in. I'll move on then to research infrastructures. As I've mentioned, we have the National Equipment Program, strategic research infrastructure platforms. I've listed some of them there, the three main ones, which you can read. Our CEO has mentioned the national facilities that we have. Itemba Labs focuses on accelerator-based sciences. It's based in Cape Town. We have a biodiversity and environmental cluster. SAON is a virtual network. It doesn't have a physical entity like the other national facilities. I think people may be familiar with SIAM, which is housed in Grahamstown, and that looks at biodiversity and environmental sciences. The third cluster is the astronomy and geodetic sciences cluster, and that includes astronomy. Under astronomy and geodetic sciences, the South African Astronomical Observatory in Cape Town, SARAO, the South African Radio Astronomy Observatory as well. Now, we have substantial research infrastructures in the country that enables us to undertake internationally competitive research and attract international collaborations. But we also need access to global research infrastructures, which are far too expensive to establish on our own. And so we also have partnerships with a number of international global research infrastructures listed there. JINR, CERN, ESRF are examples. But we also have inbound global research infrastructures, and the most notable of that are the SKA and the SALT research infrastructures. Also included in our mandate is engaged science. And this is something, an area that we as a country will need to be giving greater attention to, greater investment to. SASTA is the entity that has been driving science engagement. I think many colleagues will have worked with SASTA. But the notable thing is that engaged science or engaged research is not just science communication. And this diagram taken from Adrian Keller speaks to the interplay and the relationship between scientists and society for greater socioeconomic impact of the research that is undertaken. And Chair, I will stop there. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Pamela. I really appreciate that. Sorry to have put pressure on you to finish earlier. I have on the chat a number of comments and questions, so I'd like to take them perhaps two at a time. And may I request that we keep the responses brief so I can go through all of them. So the first one is a comment actually. So the colleague Sabelo Hadebe says, my issue is with NRF policy of postgraduate students funding. I think it does take away from supervisors the opportunity to peak students. So as an example, we've had 2 students, sorry, with funding looking for supervisors in our department. So it is very likely that we will have students with money, but no placements in research lab. So perhaps a brief response to that comment. Then the next one comes from one of the academic advisors, Professor Kurt van der Westhuizen. So it says, please share your views about conceptions of knowledge in relation to knowledge systems and the gap between IKS and science. But can we take those 2 first, and then I'll come to the others.
Thank you very much, Program Director. Maybe I'll ask Dr. Maraj to respond to the policy one in terms of it taking away the, let me just check here, taking the ability or the opportunity for the supervisors to pick students. And here, the reason this was brought in was we were trying to address a particular gap, which I'll ask Dr. Maraj to just talk to.
Thank you, Ramila.
Okay, so we have, since 2013, we were issued with ministerial guidelines for the postgraduate funding with funds from the Department of Science and Innovation. And the postgraduate funding policy gives effect to those guidelines. And one of the things that it required of us is to take financial need into account, which is why you see we now have a system where we fund on partial cost of study or full cost of study. The second thing is that we had several different bursary values, and we had to standardize that. We also had discrepancies where some students would meet a supervisor in the corridor and just get a bursary, and others had to go through a competitive process to go through to get these bursaries. We would spend a lot of funds and effort as NRF reviewing applications, and then we found that the university repeated the review before they approved the projects. And so the idea of the postgraduate funding policy, and I don't want to take up time, I can do a whole session on that, was that we now have a single entry point for NRF postgraduate funding. So everybody applies through a single entry point, firstly. Secondly, that allows us an effective and auditable process to determine financial need and to distinguish between students that are eligible for full cost and partial cost of study. The NRF is no longer reviewing the applications, it's reviewed at the university. So you, the higher education institutions, are now determining which students are fundable and not fundable. It's an expectation that when a university submits an application to the NRF, that the universities have done their due diligence to ensure that the infrastructure, the supervisor, the running costs are in place. And so by the time that application gets to us and it's submitted to us by the institution, we expect that it has met all of those criteria. We don't as yet as a country have reached a stage where we can say we can give you a bursary and we can give you running costs. We have tried to increase the value of the bursaries to full cost of study and partial cost of study. And the consequence of that is that we are funding 40% fewer students. So there have been some challenges with the implementation. And as I say, I don't want to eat up all the time speaking to that. I'm happy to engage further. But we had to, at some point, bite the bullet and say, we cannot continue saying we have to fund 3,000 honors students, therefore we're going to give 2,000, 30,000 and 1,000, 60,000. We had to bite the bullet. And with the exception of the partial cost PhD students, everybody else will get a higher bursary value than they have been receiving in the past.
All right, thank you very much. The next question comes from another academic advisor, it's Professor Everard Weber. And his question is, the NRF used to fund what it called blue skies research. Does it still do so? And I want to actually add to that a bigger question, because I've seen from Romila's presentation that there's a very strong disciplinary bias to how the funds are deployed. Now, you may know that the third World Conference on Higher Education is being held in May in Barcelona. And what it's trying to look at is what is the agenda for knowledge production and especially for higher education until 2060 or 2063, I can't remember now. So it begs the question of, other big issues. I mean, we've got so many national challenges. So are there other resources that are being channeled? So it's perhaps associated with the blue skies question. So are there targeted projects of national importance and perhaps long-term importance, and not just on the 10-year horizon that much of our funding happens on, but on the 20 and 30-year horizon? If we look at projections for environmental degradation and population growth, there's just two issues that come out of the discourse. The prognoses are actually deeply worrying. So it raises that question, so please address that. Second one comes from Asanda Mditwa, who says that the expenditure on infrastructure grants is quite low. And if we are to produce impactful research, this has to be addressed. For instance, KZN has 4 universities, but does not have the central analytical facility. So is this on the radar screen of the NRF, and how?
Thank you, Chair. These are very good questions, and I will attempt to respond. I realized we had skipped one question that was on the indigenous knowledge.
The knowledge
yes.
system, yeah.
It's fine, but I will sort of give an answer in maybe in the mix of the response that I'm going to give now. So if we talk of the expenditure on infrastructure grants, generally, I did say earlier that is a science system adequately funded? So the answer is clearly no. We don't have enough funding for that. I mentioned this earlier that if you look at, for instance, the fact that South Africa spends 45 billion rands as part of the gross expenditure in R&D, which is the 0.7% of our GDP. But what then comes through the NRF is only 10% of that amount, which is a 4 billion rands, where only half of that then goes to infrastructure. So the reason why you'll then have low expenditure on infrastructure is because, again, we don't have enough resources. That's a critical challenge. And we have been trying now to talk to all the relevant departments, it be treasury, it be higher education, it be DSI, amongst others, just to see whether we can try to move the bar in terms of how the science system is funded. So I think this is a problem that is general, and we agree that it is slow, but we are working with what we have at the moment. Blue Sky Research. I would like to rephrase the question to say, do we fund fundamental research? Yes. Fundamental research, yes, we continue funding. But in terms of the priorities, maybe they're not fully defined at this particular stage. And I think in the presentation, and I'll ask Dr. Kari just to talk briefly, because some of the instruments that fall within this space still do work that talk to fundamental science. We're not going to move away from the fundamental science, but it's not going to be a fundamental science where one may not actually be able to see what impact it's going to make. And again, it's not because we are saying blue sky research or fundamental research is not important. It's very, very, very important. We still fund it, but one has to prioritize. How do we prioritize? That's when we go into government priorities and we look into the science white paper and you say, what are the areas that are identified there for government to focus on over the next 10 years or so. So that's what we sort of look, and we are sort of informed with the decadal plan and all other plans of government. That's what sort of happens. Again, it's also a question of, if we had all the resources, one was going to say, you know, all fields are fine, let's fund everything. We don't have enough resources. Maybe Dr. Kati, you want to just talk briefly on that? I know we're running out of time, but let's just be very brief.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think you've hit it on the nail that we do not have sufficient resources, but we still continue to fund basic research or fundamental research, as you call it. And if you look at, for example, taking SACHI as an example, almost all, like up to 90% of our research, of our SACHI chairs, are doing fundamental research, because we have three types of SACHI chairs. We have your canonical or classic ones that focus on the basic research, and we have those that focus on research and development, and then of course others that find on a research and innovation, or R&D chairs, if you like, more towards the innovation type, including bilateral. But the bulk of our chairs are in the basic sciences. And I'll respond to very quickly to the indigenous knowledge, the misconception. I think the conception that there is a gap between IKS and science. I think that is a misconception, because the NRF mandate is very clear. It unambiguously states that NRF support and promote research in all fields of science and technology, including indigenous knowledge system. And as a matter of fact, we do support a center in indigenous knowledge at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. We do support such chairs in indigenous knowledge. I think the last time I checked, we had, and moreover, those of you may have read the decadal plan, which implements the 2019 white paper on science, technology, and innovation. That still identify IKS as an important field that we must continue investing in moving forward. Thanks.
Thank you very much. There's still quite a few questions.
Maybe, Chair, if you allow me, just on that point of IKS, and just to add on what Dr. Kati mentioned, the key part is that it is an important element. I mean, the question was, about the gap, and I think this can be an academic debate in terms of whether there's a gap between IKS and science. But let's not go there. In terms of our view, we view that they're important, and that's why we support both from the NRF point of view. Thank you. All right,
thank you. I'm just going to run through the other questions, and then I request, because our time is out. So I'd like you to request you to just give very brief responses so that no one's question falls off the table. So the first question is from Zaid about, is there a reason why the equipment grants are only allocated on a one-year basis? The second is, you can have funds to run a project, but no students to do the work, and there's no guaranteeing of recruiting students for the project. That's because of the decoupling of postgraduate funding from research grants. So perhaps address that issue. Then The other question is from Tanyani. My question is on PhD funding. What is the criteria for full and partial funding for the cost of study? He elaborates upon it, but unfortunately I can't get into it. Then the other one is from Aurelia. While we are appreciative of research funds, the removal of grant-linked bursaries translates to a lab with running costs but no hands to do the work. So how do we address that conundrum? And then from Sabelo again, finally, Osi Tokozani has also raised the question. So Sabelo is proposing a transformation of the next phase of the SACHI chairs. So it is arguing that it doesn't speak to the vision and the mandates of the NRF. Transformation and sustainability, for example, are excellent, but lacking in some aspects. Locke's retiring, perhaps he's arguing for younger SACHI chairs. And from Topizani, Taba was, he got a post-PhD Tutuka grant, but the letter didn't reach the NRF in time. And then he's asking for the letter this year, for this year funding, since the duration of the funding was for 3 years. He's told that everything has collapsed. So how is this being addressed? All right, we'll have to leave it there, unfortunately, because Aurelia, your further question came after the time is up. Unfortunately, I can't take it. So just very brief responses, please, if you don't mind.
Thank you very much. And these are very good questions. I'm not going to get into the full details. I think we need perhaps a longer lunch to go through all of these questions. But maybe let me just give overarching responses, and I'll ask my colleagues to just touch on a few of these things. The question on the SACHI chairs transformation aspect is true, but maybe the question that we must be thinking about should be a different question as opposed to how do we make sure that we transform it in the next phase. Should we even have a SACHI chair going forward, or should we be stopping the instrument and starting a new instrument? These are the kind of questions that we need to actually be getting to. We should avoid being limited to the current way of thinking. And in that context, we have asked our line department to allow us to review some of these instruments, whether they have reached their objectives. You remember some of these chairs, rather some of these instruments were formed with a particular idea in mind, 2005, 2006, or whatever time it was. And now you're saying, we have gone through this for the last 15 years for some of them. That's why the SACHI chairs are now reaching their end of life of 15 years in some cases. Now, the question that we need to be having is to say, do we continue with a similar instrument, or we need to start a new instrument that will address a particular gap? And what is this gap? And this is what I would sort of expect to get from a conversation like this, as opposed to, can we then get new SACHI chairs to do the following? Do we even need SACHI chairs going forward, or need something different? So these are kind of conversations that I want us to have going forward. If I respond to another one quickly, maybe it's a question on, let me just see now. There was a question that I thought maybe it might allow us to, okay, I can't remember which one it is. Maybe let me allow my colleagues to come through. Dr. Maharaj, you can answer any of the questions.
Brief responses, please, so we can wrap up.
Okay, Chair, we were of the opinion that this meeting was scheduled until 5:30, which is why we prepared about a half an hour presentation. And then, so we anticipated questioning going up to 5:30. So I'm not sure what the timing of the meeting is.
Oh, is it? Okay. Sorry, Kirti, can you just clarify? You say on the chat line it is.
5:30, Naren.
Oh, sorry, I thought it's 5. Okay. No, then no pressure, Romila. Please proceed.
So we also understood the brief that I was given was that colleagues wanted to understand the broader landscape and networking, which is what we prepared around. But I see that a lot of the questions that are coming up are operational questions, some of which we have dealt with, and some of which we could have dealt with on just a Q&A to deal with questions that people have. For example, there are lots on the postgraduate funding. So you know, for example, we have responded to the question that came from Tokozani, and in terms of communicating to this cohort of future professors, what colleagues need to understand is that we have auditable processes at the NRF. And so there's a very definitive process wherein you request a carryover of fundings, or whereby funds are released and spent and accounted for. And if there has been a mess up at the institutional level and a researcher's grant was cancelled and our financials have been audited, we cannot then go and reinstitute that grant. Our auditing processes will not allow us to do that. What we do sometimes, if it's possible for us to do, we have extended the period of the research grant so that we could give the person funding in the next year. In the case of postgraduate students, we cancel all the grants at a set time, or even other grants. But if someone comes to us a month or two after we've canceled a grant and they say, there's a mistake, can I have that grant reinstated? We can do it. But it is not possible for us to reinstate a grant after it has been cancelled and audited. So it's very important that grant holders follow up with their research office to make sure that we have cases where the grant holder submits all the documentation, the research office doesn't submit it to us. Or we have cases where the grant holder did not submit an annual report and we've had to cancel the grant, and an individual realizes a year down the line that my grant was cancelled. So these are operational issues which I'm quite happy to have a session with other colleagues to talk about. The delinking of the grant holder linked bursaries. In the past, about 75% of our bursaries were freestanding and about 25% were grant holder linked. And every year we receive a letter from the minister telling us that we have failed to meet our equity targets. And it is the failure to meet the equity targets and to spend the funding for postgraduate students is with the grant holder linked bursaries. So what we have now is not grant holder linked bursaries, but program linked bursaries. So when a student applies, if they select SACHI, they go into the SACHI pool, and SACHI colleagues are working with the SACHI chairs, for example, to award those bursaries to SACHI supervised students. The same applies for the Tutuka program and other programs. We've designing this, or the system is designed so that the student can select a program, not an individual, but they do provide us with their supervisors either application number or grant number so that we can link it. And we also do have reallocations of awards once we've cancelled the awards that are not taken up. So I invite anybody who has a student who has applied and hasn't been funded because of budget constraints, when we're doing reallocations, we can look at that. There was a question relating to partial and full cost of study. As I said, we had received a ministerial directive to take financial need into account. So we are following the DHET ceiling of 350,000. Household income. So students that have a household income of less than or 350,000 and less, that have achieved a distinction or that are living with a disability, are eligible for full cost of study bursaries. If they have been previously NSFAS or ISPAP funded, they submit that evidence with their application, or they have an option to undergo a household means test.
So very quickly,
yes, please.
Sure. I just want to very quickly to respond a little bit more on SACHI. The first part is a question about the mini SACHI. And I just want to inform or remind colleagues that when SACHI was conceptualized back in 2006, we only had a tier 1. And of course, as we really look at it and realize that maybe we need to introduce on that tier, a lower tier, tier 2. And that is to accommodate those researchers who are not yet at the top end of their game, as like, for example, being full professors. And that's how we call backward. And we should be mindful of the fact that SACHI is not developmental. And in terms of transformation and sustainability, 5 years ago, the average age of a SACHI shareholder was around 58, 59. But recently, we've actually dropped that to less than 55. We have awarded a number of SACHI chairs who are in their late 30s, I think their early 40s. And we have also tried to transform the demographics in terms of both gender and race. You will remember that in 2015, there was a call for women only. Although it was intended to only award 20 chairs, we ended up awarding 40 chairs, which were all women. And over and above that, in 2017, we partnered with Nedbank to award chairs that were aligned to NDP. And the call was very clear that only women and Black South African may apply. And during that round, we were awarded, I think, to 18 chairs. And again, we have introduced what we call a university co-funded chair. And those colleagues who work in universities and may have seen that framework, we will attest to the fact that the framework is very clear that preference is given to males, either to Blacks and females. So we also say like those universities that have more than 15 such chairs, because we want equitable distribution of such chairs, because across the country, not only your UCTs and vets. So the framework is also clear that preference is given to those universities that who have no chairs, and we have done that recently. So Fagomahat University was awarded this inaugural chair as part of the Nedbank route, even for that matter. So we have been trying hard. The only thing is that sometimes you find that universities do not put they put candidates, nothing ventured, nothing gained. So we will encourage those universities that do not have chairs, and when a call is out, they must apply. And even now, we send out a request for concept notes for establishment for an institute of preparedness and prevention of pandemics. That was sent to all universities. But for so far, the responses that we have received are from your traditional top five universities, you see. So unless that attitude change so that your historically disadvantaged university also raise their hands up, then it's going to be difficult for us to change the system. For us as the NRF to change the system, we want those universities also to partake and submit proposal, please.
Thank you very much. So may I request, now that we have some time, to address the outstanding issues. So Thokozani has got a particular dilemma. So perhaps you can briefly advise him on the application process, where he's got to literally start from scratch because he's stuck with 7 students who are doing research, and then they don't have the funds for the chemicals and so on. And then Aurelia is pointing to a glitch somewhere in the award process. It might just be a website problem, or it might be a communication problem, but it can have quite far-reaching ramifications because she says that many of their students were not on the list of successful candidates, but when they log on to the website, they found that they were successful. So if students have just gone by the published list, then of course they might be at a significant disadvantage. And then Professor Nelwamondo, I've seen your note about the budget cut of 9%. I mean, that's staggering. If you add to that the inflationary factor, so it's much more, it's closer to 15%, perhaps 14, 15% decline in funding. So I know it's just, okay. I know that it's springing it on you, but how is this likely to affect the programs? And then perhaps let me allow Matabo to also raise her issue, since her hand is up. Matabo, don't forget to unmute.
Thank you very much, Prof, and the esteemed guests. I would like to ask Dr. Nelwamondo, under the umbrella of the NRF that you presented in your 4 slides, there is transformation or transforming equity profiles, and the next one is transforming the knowledge enterprise. My question is, for us as people who are expected to benefit from the agencies that are available, including the NRF, what counts as knowledge enterprise for the NRF and for South Africa? Because all the time, people are told you haven't published enough in international journals, you haven't collaborated enough internationally, as if what is happening or what we are doing doesn't count. So what does transforming the knowledge enterprise mean? And what are we advised to aim for? Thank you.
Thank you. Over to you and your team, Dr. Nelwamondo.
Thank you very, very, very much. These are very good questions, and I think this is what I would like to engage more on, because I think they are talking to the strategic changes that the system requires. So if I start with what Matabo mentioned now about what does it really mean to transform the knowledge enterprise. Earlier today, if I just start with this story, I was being hosted at the SMU campus in Karankuwa. And this question came up a lot in terms of, yeah, I mean, we've been trying to publish locally, and then when we apply for some of the instruments, then the comments will say we don't have a good international profile. What does that really mean, and so on? So maybe this is a question that we need to reflect on again. Remember, again, the system is not stagnant. The system is moving. As we are moving with the system, we need to check what is working for us, what does not work, what are the issues that we can listen to, and which ones can we address. So it's a key point, and I think it's a point that I'm not going to give an answer to say what does it mean. Earlier in that conversation, I gave an example of other countries, like, for instance, there was a point in India where there was a concerted effort to ensure that Indian scientists actually publish in Indian journals. And that's the thing that actually pushed a number of Indian journals to become very big and became, of this international profile with high impact factors and so on. So we might need to look into that to say, what does this really mean for South Africa? I think that's a strategic question that we need to look into. So I take note of that. I think it's a key aspect. The issue on the funding and what the impact is. I saw this story, it just got sent to me now as I was talking to you, Jay. And I'm saying, again, we're talking about limited resources in this system. The budget speech, I listened to it very carefully yesterday. I didn't hear anything about cut. I was listening for the cut. Now I get this message on the news. I'm going to verify what this really means. But we are sitting in a space where the fiscal is constrained, and I think we all agree with it. And that's why we have to find a way of, how do we assist the system? How do we actually work with everyone so that we're still serviced as a community, as a scientific community? We're still doing, we still continue doing the work that we ought to do and making the impact, so that government, when they're about to cut, it should be them within themselves that they'll say, you know what, but we should not cut the science investment because it offers this. So maybe there's something that we're not offering or that they're not seeing. It's a question of, are we not offering it? Are they not seeing it? And so on. Where's the gap? Can we have a strategic conversation about these issues? Then we talk to them, they start seeing this bigger picture. Because if we're cut, I'm not too sure how the other science councils were cut as well. So it could be a clear picture that the science councils are now cut, which means the whole idea of us sitting at 0.7% of the GDP, we're sort of going lower and lower, as opposed to, going to the aspiration where the National Development Plan talks of us getting to 1.5% by the year 2030. I see that coming. Again, it's a question of what can we do? So I want to have more of this strategic conversation. So how do we address it? You are right in terms of, in real term, the money is decreasing faster than just the cut, because inflation goes up and so on. Students that we are funding are at rates that are going up the fees are going up and whatnot. So again, it means we have even less money than what we have on paper. So in rent term and in real term, that money is getting less. So these are real challenges, colleagues. I raise the issue again. This is my last point here. I raise the point that the money that comes to the NRF for the science system is almost equivalent to the 10% of what the science system spends on research. So gross expenditure on R&D, research and development, we only get about 10% of that. That's too small. And even that small element gets cut. And the dependence on this 10% is so much because, of course, a lot of gaps. But it's a question of maybe we are too much in so many areas. Should we narrow? And it's a conversation that I'm trying to have also with some of the universities. Of course, everyone will argue that my field is very important, but we need to actually bring the reality as well to say which areas can we focus on. But let me pause there. I don't know if any of my colleagues wants to add anything.
Romila, Dr. Kart.
Yes, I'd like to propose that since there are a lot of operational questions, if this, if the cohort would like to address that, then I can bring in my other colleagues in that deal with the day-to-day operational issues. I'm probably the wrong person to ask some of the operational questions. But there was a question in terms of the list of students. So the most reliable place for a student to go and track their application is on the NRF system. But we do produce lists as we make awards, and that is largely for the benefits of the designated authorities at the universities, because each student can log onto the NRF system and track where in the process their application is. So there are multiple lists. In the case of the postgraduate students at the moment, we approved about 75% of the awards in December, and there were some outstanding awards for SACHIs and COEs and some of the other areas that were approved in January and February, and as they were approved, we released those lists. We are still in the process of approving the honors awards. We haven't received all of them from the universities. They asked for an extension until the end of March, but we're approving the honors awards as they come in. So my take-home message is that the lists are there for the DAs, and there are multiple lists, but the best place for a student to check is on the system. That will tell them exactly what is the status of the individual application.
But does it make clear, Romila, that there are supplementary lists or they're competing lists?
Well, the list will state the category of scholarships.
Okay.
Perhaps we could indicate to students, or it does say at the top of the list which category it is. Perhaps students, we need to put into our core documents indicating to the students, which we do. We do tell the students they must track their application on the online system. But as I say, that list is largely there for the DAs, but we will highlight that message when we do the next briefing with the DAs for the next call.
And I think perhaps the research officers should make that clear as well. So they should be playing that kind of role and conscientize the researchers. All right, thank you very much. Dr. Kati, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, thanks. I wanted to weigh in on the knowledge enterprise. That knowledge enterprise it's knowledge-intensive companies where knowledge-based products are offered, and it speaks about innovation or translation of research into knowledge-based services and products and so on. So, like, I think it hinges more on innovation. So that's what we mean when we say we want to transform the enterprise. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So I'll take the last three questions. So the first of these is from Jayshika Sidat, who says, my understanding of globally or internationally recognized is different to merely publishing in international journals. How would one measure or understand one's international recognition? Second one comes from Professor van der Westhuizen. The critical question for further dialogue is what counts as knowledge, as the knowledge enterprise? On just acknowledging the confirmation of the importance. And Professor Weber raises, what is meant by international? I think it's associated with Jay Shika's question. It usually refers to the rich Western countries. It also means that we must catch up with them and emulate them and their higher education practices, which are often contested. So may I then ask each of you to respond and perhaps make a summing statement if you'd like to, but no pressure to do so if you don't have anything further to say, so we can close up. So thank you very much. Dr. Nelwamondo, over to you.
Maybe let me ask our lady to start, and then Makobeza, then I'll close.
Good, okay.
So I think when we use the word knowledge enterprise, we mean the South African system in its widest sense. And when we talk about transformation of the research agenda, it's about what research, who does the research, how do we do the research, to what end. And when we put that transformation framework together, it was because for a long time we've grappled with the word transformation, and each one of us having our own understanding. So, and we've talked about this afternoon about tough choices that we need to make and a greater expectation in terms of what is the outcome and impact of this research that we undertake as a country. When we talk about international, we're talking not just about selected countries, but we know that there's a global benchmarking. In fact, South Africa as a country, given the amount, monetary amount that we invest in research and the size of our active researchers, we actually fare quite well in the global arena. So I guess it's at the punchline is internationally recognized and nationally relevant research. Certain aspects will have more of an international flavor. If we're talking about climate change, for example, it is more of an international flavor. If we're talking about other areas, if we're talking about violence and we're talking about job creation, then it is more of a local flavor. I'll stop there, Chair. And thank you for this engagement.
Thank you very much, Fumila.
Dr. Kat.
Yeah, I think, well, if we take the colloquial use of international, it means between nations or countries. So it is not necessarily confined to overseas countries. It's something that is the research that is done and benchmarked between different countries. So it could be a collaboration between South Africa, Zambia, or any other country in Africa or elsewhere, but then that will be considered international. That is my take on that. Thanks.
Mr. Program Director, let me just use this opportunity to thank you for allowing me to come and engage with this esteemed team. As we had offered, I think for the operational questions, we can actually have a separate session where relevant teams can be brought and we can sort of have a question and answer session where they can get answers on on the specific questions that they have. But more than that, you don't necessarily need to wait for this platform to raise questions. I think we have all our emails, our phone numbers. You can pick the phones and you can call people. We want a system that is very responsive to challenges. We want to have an NRF that responds in time in a number of the challenges that you might be facing. So let's look into those and address those. What remains is a challenge on what we really want the system to be. And this is the part where I want to also again extend the offer that I mentioned earlier, that we need to come together, the meeting of minds, where we want to hear more of what's working, what's not working, what are the challenges, and so on. But more than anything else, jumping outside of the system as we know it, let's think about the to-be system, the system as we want it to be. What do we really want South Africa to focus on? I think we have a unique position, and I can look at these people around the table. I can see a lot of young people, and we want them, these young minds, to raise their voices. We are willing to listen to these and see what are the issues that, I mean, we spoke about transformation. Somebody mentioned about Sachi and saying people are old and so on. So what can we do? Is there something that you have in mind that can create maybe a new system or a new instrument that will be fit for purpose for young scientists, for young researchers? And in that case, we are willing to look into that in detail and then be able to see whether we can work with you and other colleagues to frame a system of a particular fit for purpose to address some of these issues. I think the opportunity that we have at the moment is that some of these instruments, as they come to an end, we don't want to rush in continuing them. So if you have a SACHI that's coming to an end, there's no point to then say, let's open another SACHI. We want to then use those monies to recoup that money and see whether we can actually use that for a separate instrument. And our ears are fully open. We want to hear you, and let's talk. So thank you for this conversation. I think it was engaging, but the NRF team is always available. Thank you.
Well, let me, on behalf of the program leader, Dr. Menon, and the team that consists of the staff in the directorate, as well as the advisors, take this opportunity also to thank you, Dr. Nelwamondo, and your team. You clearly went to tremendous lengths to ensure that the presentation has been illuminating and informative. And then we also appreciate your frankness and openness in your engagement with us and in addressing all of the questions. But I think that given the diversity of the kind of questions, from conceptual right down to operational, it shows you what the top of the mind concerns are of our participants. And we believe that these are likely to change in the future. So thank you once again. We will look at ways of engaging with each other further. And you've made some proposals. I'm sure there'll be other proposals coming from the participants and from the program team. So we thank you for your openness and your receptiveness, really, openness to further engagement. We will be in touch. So we thank you, and to Ramila and Dr. Kati as well. Have a good evening, colleagues, and thank you to all the participants as well for your contributions, making this such a robust engagement. I wish you all a good night.
The University of Johannesburg, the future reimagined.